Okay, on this episode, we are headed to the junkyard for a treasure hunt. 5-lug swap for that turd. Let's get in the Super Dude. Okay, here's the first victim here. We've got a competition orange 04 Mustang. Guessing it was a V6, don't see, but since they're fairly accessible, I'm going to try to get inner tie rods out of this dude. Okay, just to show you real quick what we're working with here. Got the first one off. There is inner tie rod, boot, and rack limiter. I did check that joint. It seems tight, as in no play, but still moves freely. The steering wheel on this car is locked and there's no key, so this is what I got going on here. I'm going to unthread the outer all the way off, and what I'm using is my sweet little pliers for the little clip there on the boot, pipe wrench, and a crescent wrench. So I broke the outer jam nut loose with that, and then I'm just using this guy like so. I'm going to unthread this all the way off, and then I'll show you how I pop that boot off and use my big crescent wrench to break that inner loose, and then I'll just unthread it by hand. Okay, here's a pro tip. If the ignition is locked and this inner tie rod was actually inside of there so I couldn't get to it, just go ahead and pop off the steering shaft, one 13mm pinch bolt, and then I was able to just grab that and pull it out. So let's break that loose and we'll just take it off of there. If you care about what you're doing, you should have a tool that holds the rack in there, but this isn't my rack, so. Oh, just like that. And then you can see I've gotten it off of this end 2 hours later, and then I should just be able to unscrew that by hand. This is Josh from the future with a brief intermission. What we're gonna go over here is, I told you I would give you a cost breakdown on what it costs to get this car basically repaired and back on the road. So all of the hard parts, paint and body supplies, a little bit of maintenance like spark plugs, belts, fluids, things like that, oil change. I'm going to give you the total here, and I'm going to add it as I go. So we have car, $1,500, purchased on Facebook Marketplace and negotiated down from $2,500 or $3,000 I think you wanted for it, but I did a good inspection on it and I saw all of the scabby repairs on the inner fender aprons and all that stuff, so I used that as a negotiating point. I tried to get it for like $1,100 or $1,200, but $1,500 was all he would do, which for the shape the rest of the car is in, that's a good price, in my opinion. So we have $1,500 for the car. The core support from the Junkyard, $125. The bumper from the Junkyard, $60. The paint supplies, which would be body filler, primer. I went with Omni, which is PPG's cheap line of paint products for the base and clear coat. If I had to do over again, I probably would have done a better clear coat, because this clear coat flashed and cured really fast, which it didn't really level out that well. It didn't self-level, so it's really orange peely. Anyway, $300 is what I spent on all of the paint supplies, including sandpaper and everything like that. Serpentine belt, $35. That's a little bit high, but I got the good one. Power steering pump pulley, $17. Oil, filter, and antifreeze from Walmart, Walmart's finest, but it is a Motorcraft filter, $27. Spark plugs, which I changed in the episode when I checked compression, $22. I believe they were just Autolite, they're just copper, they're not anything fancy. Trans cooler line, high pressure trans line, $5. And an air filter, $10. That can't be right, is that right? That's what I come up with. $2,101. The goal on this was to get it back on the road and make it cool, for less than $3,000. So I think we're doing pretty good so far. We still have quite a bit left. Now, I'm in the middle of doing the 5-lug swap right now. None of that stuff is in that price yet. That's just what it took to get this car back on the road basically as stock. So at the end of the episode, if you stay tuned, I'll give you a breakdown on wheels, tires, 5-lug brake parts, all of that to convert it to 5-lug and have new wheels and tires on it. What I'm gonna do is show you the cheapest way to do a 5-lug swap on a foxbody car with the parts I had and the parts I had access to. Now, the big cheap part of this is you'll see I'll have some still shots in here because what I'm going to show you is the donor car that I bought off Facebook Marketplace for $150. It was a 98 V6 Mustang with a 5-speed. Stock stuff so you can see a difference. Here is stock Thunderbird right front spring, stock rotor and hub assembly, and the stock caliper. Now here is all the stuff from our donor 98 V6 Mustang. So you can see the rotor is a little bit bigger, almost an inch it looks like from just a rough measurement. The caliper is also bigger, and the brake pads I think are a little bit bigger too. So the other good thing about this is you can upgrade this with Cobra brakes from like a New Edge Cobra Mustang or SN Cobra pretty easily. So it's also a good foundation for future upgrades. Now this is as I removed it from the car. I haven't taken the brakes apart at all, and I'm not going to. I'll show you why a little bit later. The rotors on these and the brake pads look almost brand new, so I'm not going to do anything with them. And this is a unitized bearing also. There's no packing and adjusting bearings as there is with the stock stuff. The other thing, and I'll show you how that affects it, is you probably won't be able to see it, but the steering geometry is a little bit different on the SN spindles. The tie rod location, I believe, is moved forward and out a little bit. So what I had been told is that your stock tie rods will be too short. As in they will fit, but it won't be safe because you'll barely have any thread engagement. Now, the stock spring, stock for stock here. So this is stock Thunderbird spring. This is the stock SN Mustang spring. You can see it's about 5/8 of an inch shorter freestanding like this. So I think it'll drop it actually about an inch because I don't know if the rate is different or not, but I took all of this stuff from the donor car and it's all going in here. I have the passenger side apart, we'll put it together, and then I'll show you everything on the driver's side, tear down and time lapse. That way there's not any fumbling and fiddle sticking around trying to figure stuff out. I should already be an expert. No. So what I've done here is the lower hole I've slotted down about 3/8 of an inch, both sides. So the problem is on the new spindle, the bolt spacing is just a little bit different and that bottom hole ends up being too high. So I left the top hole alone so that'll hold it the same height up and down, but then the bottom one has to be slotted so it'll line up. I fought the other side a while before I figured that out. So okay, I've got my spindle plopped on there, the new 5-lug action. You can see the stud sticks out quite a bit because these are thinner down here. That's what some of the washers are for. We actually have to stack them under the nut, otherwise the cotter pin won't line up there. So I've got to finagle getting bolts in there with washers in between, because the other thing is the spindle is thinner here. So if you're reusing your stock strut, you have to slot those holes on the bottom and then also put an 1/8 inch washer on each side. And what the issue was with their 5/8 washers, flat washers is what you need. A regular 5/8 flat washer from the hardware store is too big outer diameter, so I had to take 1/2 inch washers and drill the centers out to 5/8, and they are money. Okay, so there's both sides bolted up. You can see the washers in there on both sides, and I left the bolts a little bit loose. Both of mine needed shoved in and then tightened to try to get the camber back to where it was. It might be a degree or so positive, so we'll have to see what we do about that at the alignment. I got to get this brake line figured out. It needs an adapter, which I believe is 3/8 to 10 millimeter. And what's weird about that is this side needed nothing, it bolted right up. So there's both fronts. I'm gonna try and make one final trip to the parts store. So what I need to do is figure out what that adapter is for sure that I need for the brake line, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do the tie rods right now in case I need anything else. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay. We are jamming and in a hurry, so I don't have time to worry about a lot of camera setup. But so the accordion boot right here, we're going to remove the inner tie rods from the rack. So boot needs to come off first, then inner tie rods come off. Luckily these are a screw type clamp, which is awesome because normally you have to cut those. And then they're like a CV boot type of clamp that you crimp together with the special crimpers. Okay, and that rod just pulled out with it. That's fine, we'll pull it out. Kind of looks like a giant transfer tube from a Holley 4160. Okay, slide that down. So there is our inner tie rod joint. This little guy here is a rack limiter. We're probably going to leave that one for now. We'll see how that goes. So I'm going to turn the rack back in that way, until this is barely peeking out. That's way it's the most supported it can be. Yes, I know I'm running over every rock and piece of dirt imaginable. It's fine. We're fine. Okay, real quick here before we throw the new Junkyard unit in, you can see the reason we're swapping it out is the inners on the SN cars are longer than the old ones. You can see how far the threads go here. And I didn't actually check this out to verify, but if you use this tie rod, what the internet says is that you'll barely have any thread engagement here because you'll be at the end of the inner tie rod. So these were cheap from the Junkyard and easy enough to swap out, so we will swap them out. You do have to change the outer, I believe, also because the threads are different than the old ones. Okay, why are you still in my light again? Okay, the front is done. I'll give you a look here. Here's that adapter that took me most of the afternoon to find. I had to move the bracket from up here on the frame rail to down here on the K-member because it pulled too much on the hose when you turn. So, adapter, this is the stock SN brake hose, this is the stock Thunderbird brake line. So there's that. You can see washers in there between the strut, tie rod with a cotter key, and then let's see. You can see the washers underneath that nut with the cotter key because the Fox ball joint stud is longer. And like I said, I didn't do the brakes because these look pretty dang new. Gonna leave those be for now. Wheel bearings are tight, so toe is set with it with jack stands right here on under the end of the lower control arm. So I set the toe at an 1/8 inch toe in with the wheel straight. It probably won't be straight when I go to drive it because that's how that always goes. I will check it again with it on the ground because it'll probably change just a little bit. So I will roll over and show you the other side. And here is the other side. Moved the brake line bracket to the same spot. And you can see the washers in there. Brakes are the same. These are all SN tie rods, inner and outer. Did I get a cotter key on there? Yes, I did. And then you can see the washers and cotter key and stuff on that. So we are ready. Okay, as you can see, I've got the front back apart because while the Mustang springs looked real nice, the front tires rubbed pretty bad. Stock Mustang size, if I didn't say 245, 45, 17. Okay, so this is plan B for the front suspension. And we'll talk about why real quick and what didn't work out and what we're doing now. So, let's see. Now I gotta remember which one is which. Okay. So I showed you earlier in the video the stock Mustang coil spring this is the stock Thunderbird coil spring. So you'll notice the Thunderbird spring is taller than the Mustang spring, but not by much, like 3/4 of an inch. This Mustang spring, however, lowered the Thunderbird a lot more than just that 3/4 of an inch, and if you look closely you can see why. The coils on the Thunderbird spring are thicker, so that means it has more rate. Basically for a given amount of travel, there's more pressure on this Thunderbird spring, which makes sense because the Thunderbird's a heavier car. This lowered it too much in the front with this particular spindle combo and wheel and tire combo, and the tires rubbed pretty bad. So this is plan B. I don't want full height, I want it lowered a little bit. So this is what I've already done on the other side, is I cut one complete coil out of the other side, and you can see at the bottom where it ended, I cut it off exactly one coil. So I have basically a ring where the ends align with each other, but they are obviously one loop apart from each other. So that's what we're going to do on this side, and I'll show you, and then we'll see where we're at. That should get it lowered a little bit, but keep the same rate. It'll actually increase the rate because you have the same amount of load being dispersed over a shorter distance, so that will like make it a little bit stiffer, if that makes sense. So old Mustang spring wasn't enough, sagged too much when I installed it and caused the front tires to rub. So we're going to try cut stock springs, which I've already done the other side, and there's a sophisticated way that you can kind of guesstimate how much height it will take off, but I've done this before on other cars I've had, so I'm just going off of my experience. So I'm taking off the rubber isolator here off the bottom, and we'll go ahead and cut that, and then we'll put that back on. So basically the way, it's not super critical on this, but the way I'm cutting it is so that it will go back into that lower spring pocket the same way. So I'm going to wrap electrical tape. Actually, we've got bright green masking tape. Let's do that. And the reason I do that is just to help me mark it so I can get a straight cut. So we want the remaining spring to be in line with the way this end is here. So I'm just coming straight down from that and going to wrap the tape around like that. So that is how we're going to cut, because it's not exactly in line with the spring. So we're basically making our cut straight down from that guy right onto the next coil loop, and that will leave us a loop just like this. So I take for granted sometimes that all of you out there are, I sometimes take for granted that all you guys out there are guys that have kind of done stuff like this with cars, and maybe I would do a little better if I geared it more towards, you know, if you've never done stuff like this, why do we do this? Well, the reason we're doing this is the stance, the suspension height, lowered, not lowered, lifted, whatever, and wheels and tires, in my opinion, that is the biggest difference you can make on how a car looks. And I'll show you that when I reveal the car when it's all done. I'll show some before footage of the stock wheels not lowered, and then these 5-lug wheels all lowered and everything. Biggest difference you can make, making your car look cool. Bang for the buck is high. So let's get on cutting this. The only thing I would say is you don't want to heat this spring up too much because they are tempered. So that's part of what gives them their springiness. So what we're going to do is just use a cutoff wheel, and we're going to go straight down through this guy as quick as we can, heating it up as little as possible. All right, there you go. The piece that's left is very close to in line with the original loop that was there. So that is one full coil cut. If you hear people talk about I cut 1.5 coils, 2 coils, that's one full coil. So we'll deburr that just a little bit. Oh, you can see I accidentally got that guy a little bit. That'll be fine. That's fine. I'll deburr that a little bit and we will kind of brush it off and get this rubber isolator back on there, and we'll get it back in the car. And that will just about conclude the front. In the next episode, we're going to show you how to do the rear. All right, let's see what that did for us. Well, that looks pretty good. You have to really roll it and let the suspension really settle to tell, but it's probably an inch higher than it was, but still lower than it was with the stock springs, so I'm pleased with that. That's pretty nice. So that is what cutting, I'm out of breath. That's what cutting your front springs does for you. And that is going to have to do it for this episode because we ran into problems with the rear end, which we will get to in the next episode. A couple things I just wanted to go over real quick. You'll hear me saying some things in the video like SN or SN95 or foxbody. So foxbody refers to this chassis platform. Mustang, Capri, Fairmont, Zephyr, I think Granadas, Thunderbird, Cougar. It's 79 to 93 for the Fox chassis for Ford's smaller cars. And then the SN chassis or SN95 started in 94. That's when the Mustangs changed body style. So 94 to 98 is the SN95 style. And then 99 to 04 would be the Mustang change body style again. That's called the SN95 New Edge platform. So if you hear me say SN, I'm talking about 94 to basically 04 Mustang parts, not being super specific. So I only have about $60 into the front end of this 5-lug swap so far, and that's because I bought a donor car for super cheap. Took what I needed from it, and then I scrapped the rest of the car, the cats, and then the whole car body. And so I got a lot of that money back. So about 60 bucks. Donor front brake parts plus that fitting. That brake line fitting, I believe, is the only new part that I actually put on there. So next episode on this car, we're going to get into the rear. Before we do that, we're going to have a little delay because of the issues with the rear end. So we are getting back on Project Vicky 460. And we are getting started on the Crown Vic front end swap, finally. We're going to talk about everything that is, options you can do to do it. I'm going to do it, of course, the cheapest way. That's still a good way to do it because that's kind of our jam here on this channel. If you like what you see, make sure you subscribe for more. Thank you for everybody commenting, liking, and sharing. If you have any questions, just drop a comment down below. I try to read all of them and get back to you. So there's going to be more good stuff, like I said, coming from this car that will apply to any Mustangs. So hopefully we're on track to still be doing the cheapest 5-lug swap for a Fox body.